All right, today is December 21st, 2017. My name is Jason Higgins. I'm a PhD student in American History at UMass Amherst. I'm in Amherst, Massachusetts at the UMass Oral History Lab. This interview is part of the Incarcerated Veterans Oral History Project, but focused more on military sexual trauma in this interview. With me today is Robert Hunter, United States Navy veteran. Mr. Hunter, may I call you Bob?
Please do.
Thank you for joining me today and for your willingness to share your story and participate in the project.
It's a pleasure.
Um, Before I get into when and where you were born, I wondered, could you list your dates of service and your branch and any medals that you might have?
Okay. I entered service on July 5th, 1980, and was discharged from service, I believe it was December 21st, 1984.
Okay.
It was about 4.5 years of service.
And
I was in the U.S. Navy. My highest rank was electronics technician, second class. I received the Navy Unit Citation, the Navy Expeditionary Medal, and 2 Sea Service ribbons.
okay. Thank you for that information.
Yep.
It'll be useful for researchers someday, I hope.
Yeah, not that it's a big deal. I'm also a recipient of the Connecticut Wartime Veterans Medal as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. When and where were you born?
I was born at Wesson Maternity Hospital in Springfield, Mass.
Okay.
I don't even think I know it's not Wesson Maternity anymore, but
Mhm.
I was born January 14th, 1962.
62.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Tell me about your parents.
Well, my mom and dad met at a drive-in Chicopee. My dad was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, and he was Air Force. And my mom grew up in Chicopee Falls. So, happenstance, they met each other. He was car surfing.
Okay.
um, my mom, like I said, my mom grew up in Chicopee Falls. She went to Tech. She was a singer. She had a great voice. And my dad grew up in Riverdale, Illinois, which is south side of Chicago, near Dalton.
Okay.
Just off of 144th Street on South Wabash Avenue. You know what's funny? I've been by my mom's house in Chicopee, where she grew up, and I couldn't tell you how to get there. We've been there, and I couldn't tell you how to get there. When my dad met my mom, I know she was 18, and it wasn't long after that I was born. They were married just before I was born. I think back then my father was kind of looking for his place in the world. He was a naturally gifted mechanic.
Is that what you did in the Air Force?
That's what he wound up doing.
Okay.
He originally had enlisted to do airplane repair. He had seen a plane crash and that actually suffered engine failure, and it changed his mind. He said, "Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm not doing that."
Too much responsibility?
I don't think it was the responsibility so much as that seeing that scared the crap out of him. Yeah, I've never really known him to shirk responsibility. I mean, there are patterns that one elicits over a span of years.
Right.
That was unlike him. So I would, working backward, I'd have to say I doubt it was avoiding responsibility.
I just meant for the lives of people.
Well, like I said, I think it shook him. It scared him.
Okay.
And he wound up repairing runways briefly. And he got in tight with the engine crew chief. He had told this chief there was something wrong with this particular truck, and the guy was frustrated because other mechanics had tried to fix it. And my father said, I can fix it. He fixed it, And it tells the story that I had the thing running, but the chief came up and he said, "I thought you fixed this thing." He goes, "I did." He goes, "Well, start it up." He goes, "It's running." so it's funny, but he wound up essentially being the head mechanic of the motor pool.
Okay.
So he got out and he became a heavy equipment mechanic, and he did that and operated heavy equipment and drove heavy equipment most of my life, my younger life.
Do you have siblings?
I do.
You do. How many?
Two.
Two. And you're the oldest.
I am the oldest.
Brothers, sisters.
Well, we kid about my middle brother, but yeah, the two brothers.
Mm.
Well, it's funny. My little brother and I get asked, do we have any sisters? We say, well, our brother Mike, but he's not. he's
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Windsorville, in Connecticut.
Do you consider that home?
Yeah,
Childhood home.
that's my hometown. Yeah, Windsorville is part of East Windsor.
Okay.
It's a little section of East Windsor.
Is that like suburban environment?
Oh, very much so. It was farmland, a lot of farmland. The Windsorville Pond. We spent a lot of time in the winter on the ice. In fact, if there was a free moment, we were on the ice playing hockey.
Playing hockey.
Yeah.
Okay. Were you involved in organized sports as well as a young teenager?
Well, in high school, I was on the wrestling team,
Okay.
and I ran cross country to get in shape for wrestling.
Did you do Boy Scouts or anything like that too?
Did Cub Scouts when I was a kid. Yeah, that was about it. We did Cub Scouts. We spent most of our free time, if we weren't doing schoolwork, we were hanging out with the neighborhood kids, playing sports.
Okay.
Played a lot of sports growing up, just not organized.
Mm.
Playing hockey, we used to go to the Hartford Arena and torment the organized hockey players and challenge them to come out and play us on the pond. And we'd usually trounce whoever came out, even though they were organized. We would trounce them. And it was kind of cool because I think it was like 9 or 10, and I was playing hockey with 14 and 15-year-olds who, if they hip checked us, would hip check us, across the ice. So it was fun. We'd just get back up and go right back at it.
So you played hockey and you were into wrestling. Sounds like you were a pretty tough kid growing up.
Yeah.
Was it a rough neighborhood at all, or was it
just my house?
Just at your house with brothers?
No. My dad was a very physical parent. He he grew up. His dad grew up in a Masonic orphanage, and he was definitely his father's son. My brother Mike would screw up, the second in line. He would screw up, and I'd get punished for it, for not keeping him out of trouble. So I took the brunt of the physical.
Was
punishment.
that more disciplinary, or do you consider that more abusive?
I think it was abusive. It was not necessary. The punishments were cruel, like kneeling on rice in the corner of the house. Of course, getting the belt, it was across. Sometimes it was punishment, and other times it was abuse. He never hit my mother. Not that I ever saw evidence of, anyway. He was verbally abusive to her. She was a lot smarter than he was. He's a smart guy, but my mom was really smart. And even though she only finished high school, I mean, you couldn't hide her brilliance. I grew up with ADHD, and she, recognizing this, found alternate ways for me to learn, where I couldn't sit and read for long periods of time. So she'd pull out an encyclopedia from our Collier's encyclopedias, and just open up a page and say, "Here, why don't you read this? We'll talk about it."
Mm.
And so that's how I learned a lot of the things I learned. I still have I have the encyclopedia set.
Mm.
Yeah, it was. I never struggled with comprehension or retention. I couldn't sit still and do it. So.
Did that lead to any disciplinary problems in school for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. It started in kindergarten, went all the way through middle school. In middle school, I developed my wit, um, which was a little too quick for my own good because I usually got the crap kicked out of me. Um, but of course, me being who I was would torment them and say, my father hits a lot harder than that. So they took that as a challenge. I was okay as long as he didn't hit the face.
Mm.
Um, but they used to take turns trying to hit me in the stomach to get me to throw up, and it never worked because I played hockey. So, and I was a farm boy. So, from here down, I'm just muscle.
Did you take that as a badge of honor at the time?
Um,
In a way.
I didn't really think of it that way, but yeah, I suppose I was oppositionally defiant.
Mm.
I mean, that was it. It was like, go ahead. There's nothing you can do that can be worse than what I get at home.
So it sounds like your mother was a great influence in your life, though. Did you have other influences in your life, positive?
I think Alan Skinner. He was one of my two wrestling coaches, but he was also my math teacher at Cheney Tech. He taught me more about being a good person, about not tolerating unfairness, um, seeking justice respectfully, um, to see things always in a better light. Um, yeah, he was the one teacher too. If I screwed up and he found out about it, it was worse than getting punished.
Mm.
Um, yeah, he was. I think that in my teen years, my parents got divorced when I was 16, and he had more to do with developing the person I became as an adult than even my parents did. My best friend's mom, um, uh, Blaine Cohen, his mom, when my parents were going through the divorce, they spent a lot of time over their house, and she more than willingly took me in. I remember standing around the sink scraping chitlins with her. I hated chitlins unless she made them.
Chitlins, I didn't expect that in New England, actually. I'm from the South, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I don't eat them either, but, they're pretty popular in Arkansas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, typically, well, I don't know if I'd say it's just the black families, but there was a lot of Southern cooking in their house.
Mm.
Chitlins, collards, and her collards are great. Black-eyed peas.
Mm.
Um, she made her own pulled pork, but it wasn't like barbecue.
Mm.
She would cook a whole pork shoulder, and you could just take the meat apart with a pair of tongs. Oh, so good. She used to make crackling out of the skin, which, of course, is terrible for you, but it was really good when you were a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
So your parents divorced when you were 16. That's a pretty tough time. Did you live with your mom or your dad?
Ultimately, well, my father was living in he was living in Windsor Locks when they first split up. He got an apartment, and so we saw him here and there. And then when the divorce was final, my father got the house. My mom wanted nothing to do with it, so we wound up staying with my father.
Okay.
And so it was my brother Mike and I, and my little brother Paul went and lived with my mom.
Okay.
So that kind of sucked because we didn't get to see our little brother all the time. It was the three of us survived that. My two brothers and I, when we're together now, we're thick as thieves. I mean, we're a traveling inside joke. I mean, we're the three guys who will go out, and even with our families, the three of us are on a different plane of humor than anyone in our family.
What's the age differences between you guys?
My brother Mike's a year and a half younger. My brother Paul's 8 years younger.
Okay, so quite the difference with Paul.
Yeah, well, Paul is I'm probably closer to Paul. It's interesting because my brother Mike has a completely different recollection of our childhood than I do, other than knowing that I caught the brunt of the shit in the family. But yeah, I'm surprised at how we've stayed together. Even now, you know, I know my brother Mike really tries. He's got this manner of coming off like he's a sage. And in a lot of ways, he's got some good insight. But he's neither as sagely or as experienced as he thinks he is.
Interesting. Was college an option for you, or was that ever in your plans as a teenager? I mean,
well, I wanted to go to school, but I couldn't afford to. My family didn't have the money to. My one of the curses of being a heavy equipment mechanic is my father's back was terrible. He wound up having to have surgery, and it put him out of commission for a while. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I used to fish a lot in the pond, just to stretch meals out. I remember having woodchuck stew a few times. You can eat it. It's not great.
Yeah.
It's fatty.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's not a particularly flavorful meat. We had squirrel. The O'Donnells across the street used to hunt, so they'd bring squirrel over all the time, and we'd have squirrel to eat. Yeah, I mean, I remember even now that I mentioned the O'Donnells, I think probably the one big thing that we took from my dad that was good. There are a few things actually, but one is help your neighbor, because you never know when you're going to need help. So if they're doing something, offer to help. And it usually turned out to be fun. If we were just hanging out with the O'Donnells, they were older than us, so they would teach us things, like about working the farm, which rafter to jump into the hay bales on.
Did you you went into the Navy shortly after graduation?
Yeah, I enlisted on the delayed entry program. I think it was in either March or May. I can't remember which month. Actually, I think it was May, because I knew I didn't stand a chance of getting into college because there was just no money for it.
So, did you have plans to use the military as a way to seek a higher education for yourself or economic mobility?
I did initially. We had the Veterans Educational Assistance Program, or VEAP, and it sucked. It was nothing like the GI Bill now. Not even close. In fact, I think in terms of developing a more educated workforce, the military was particularly bad in the 80s with the educational assistance, because they would give you $2 for every dollar you put in. But in 4 years, you might have enough money to pay for a semester, maybe two. So it didn't help going to school at all. So I had started out the VEAP program, and I just took my money out of it. At one point when I was after I had re-enlisted, applied to be put into the boost program, which would take someone out of the enlisted ranks, put them through school, run them through OCS, and then give them a commission. And while I'm sure it'll come up later, I was out of the service before I ever got to go in. and I was approved to go into the program.
Mm.
So, yeah, the things we do to protect ourselves, even if it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Even if your vision of it is skewed, a vision of what's going on is skewed in the wrong direction. Um, Hindsight's 2020.
Right.
It really is.
Well, to step back, did you have other influences on your decision to go into the military? You were in the delayed entry program.
No,
Fam-
that was my decision.
okay,
That was I had control over that.
okay.
um,
Do you remember any significant historical events from that time that might have influenced you as well, or
no, mine was all education oriented.
okay?
I wanted I wanted an education, and I knew I couldn't afford to go to school. So what I did is I went through the different branches, and at the time, the Navy had the best educational
Mm,
opportunities. So that's how I started in the Navy.
okay. You mentioned that you had an uncle in our pre-interview that you had an uncle who was in Vietnam.
Yeah, he was a Marine.
Did that impact your understanding of what it meant to serve in the military or be a veteran?
Um, I always, you know, when I was a kid, I always felt close to him. He was also my godfather.
Okay.
So,
And this is your mother's brother or your father's
my
brother?
father's brother, my
Father's brother.
father's youngest brother.
Okay.
Well, my father's a middle child.
Hmm.
My Uncle Dave, I think I met my Uncle Dave twice in my life, and I was okay with that.
Okay.
He's a bitter old man. Um, my father is the one who talked to both the brothers. The oldest and the youngest never talked.
Hmm.
Um, m- m- my Uncle Dave fell out of favor. Well, actually, my grandmother fell out of favor with him, which was probably to her benefit.
Hmm.
Um, and my Uncle Tom stayed at home to take care of my grandfather.
Hmm.
He had had I think he had 3 or 4 heart attacks before he died. He died in his 80s. Um, and I mean, he worked on the railroad 60 years of his life.
Hmm.
I mean,
It's a hard life.
yeah. He held every job you could hold in a railroad yard. Everything. I mean, he was a yard master too, I mean, which is tons of responsibility. It's not a. It's not for the faint of heart.
Right.
Um, it's like being a conductor.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
So you said that the uncle that was a Marine, he was your godfather. Did you guys have a close relationship?
well, we didn't write much or anything, but when we took trips out to Illinois, I gravitated toward him.
Oh, so he was in the
Yeah.
military.
Except for when he went to Vietnam. Um, and when we went out to visit my grandparents, um, I had in the morning I would have with my grandfather a small bowl of prunes because after he had his first heart attack, prunes were a big deal, so he wasn't straining his heart going to the
Mhm.
bathroom. And I'd have like a prune and Roman meal toast with peanut butter on it,
Mhm.
and that was our morning. He'd have his coffee and same thing every morning. So that would be our time.
Mhm.
That was kind of cool. When my uncle came around, he and I used to listen to music.
Okay. What kind of music?
Oh, rock.
Rock music.
Yeah, but I mean, we listened to all the typical era stuff, but he really liked the Mamas and the Papas. Um,
So he was kind of a counterculture uh, Vietnam veteran. You
I
could say.
don't think so. I just think he was a music nut, but he wasn't. I don't think so.
He wasn't. He wasn't a hippie, right?
No, when he came back, he drank.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't get high. Um, but
Did he
he,
have any problems from the war that you know of?
oh
Or?
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. He said I was sober 2 days.
interesting.
in Vietnam. He said I was sober the day I got there and the day I left.
Mm-hmm.
And he came back home, and I'd go out to the Elks Club with him when I was in the service, and he'd knock back a bottle of scotch. Jesus Christ. That's how he drank.
Mm.
And later in life, he switched to beer. He died. He died this year, in June.
Condolences to you.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. I hadn't talked to him in years, but it was always, in a lot of ways, it was like I was his son, even though we didn't have a lot of contact. When I was going to school in Great Lakes, Illinois, I used to take the trains down to my grandfather's place and spend the weekends there, hang out with them. So it was, I turned 21 when I was there, and I remember he took me out for the best steak I've ever had, which in Chicago apparently is not hard to find. But yeah, it was ridiculous how good the steak was. And then, we left Chicago and went back to Dalton. And Dalton's just over the railroad tracks from Riverdale. And the Elks Club was within walking distance of the house. So, we went to the Elks Club, and he drank after. I mean, we had a couple of drinks at dinner, and he knocked back a bottle of scotch at night on my birthday. Yeah.
Did you guys bond over your shared military experiences, or it was more of a familial bond?
I think it was both.
Right. Okay.
He talked to me about some of the stuff he did and went through while he was over there. He was a telephone lineman, and when he was in Vietnam, his job was basically to rig telephone lines through rice paddies. And he said if I wasn't drunk, I wouldn't have been able to do it because I was getting shot at all the time. He goes, thank God they were crappy shots. Yeah. He never got hit. Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least that I know of. I remember he was all excited because he beat the draft. He joined the Marine Corps like 2 days before the draft notice came. He was on.
So let's talk about your path to the military. So you did the delayed entry program, and you had reasons to join based on your pursuit of education or your aspirations for education. What was the basic training process like for you?
Well, but I went to Orlando. I have a few things that stuck out in boot camp. My first day there, I remember thinking, my God, it's freaking hot. I was just standing there and just drenched in sweat. It was hot and humid. And I was thinking, why did I pick Orlando? That was like, originally I could have gone to Great Lakes or San Diego. And I'm thinking, well, Great Lakes, I've been to Illinois. I'm good with that. So I'm thinking, I've never been to Florida. Maybe I'll go to Florida. Boy, was that move. So my second night, I woke up in the middle of the night with a palmetto bug on my chest. And you know what palmetto bugs are?
No.
Yeah, they're roaches that are about that big and they fly. So I woke up the company, and company commander comes out and he goes, "What the hell's going on in here?" I was like, "Freaking bug on my chest." And all the southern guys were laughing at him. "What's the matter, Hunter? Ain't you never seen a palmetto bug?" It's like, "No, we don't have flying roaches where I come from." I said, "We have mice. I can live with mice." Yeah, so that became a big joke.
They gave you a hard time about it.
Yeah, but it was like yeah, I had that coming. I went into boot camp in phenomenal shape, and I left in not so phenomenal shape. I used to ask my company commander if I could routinely attend IT, which was intensive training.
Mm-hmm.
They did it at night. It was basically a workout, and it was additional. And I did that for most of boot camp. And I had asked at one time if I could go do a Mo tour. He goes, "No, that's not a good idea." Because Mo tour is for people who are bad. You're not bad. I was like, "Oh, okay." He goes, "You can go to IT all you want."
So the Navy wasn't as rigorous as you had hoped for?
Well, not physically.
Okay.
I mean, they had, when I was a sophomore in high school, I went to a wrestling camp where we had to stay in push-up position. And over the course of a week, we went from doing it from 30 seconds to 15 minutes. And I got to boot camp, and they had this week 1, day 4. 1 4-day was like hell day, where they get inspectors from or they get company commanders from other companies come and just trash your locker, trash your bed, over inspect everything. And my bunkmate and I used to practice. We made our beds together, so everything came out perfect. There was no way they were going to mess with that. Then we had to fold our laundry a certain way. When they couldn't find anything, they still dropped us. And I was in push-up position. And I
hate these lights and
Yeah.
on the entire campus. I didn't think to ask, but why the Navy?
Better education. I think I mentioned that before. I chose the Navy.
Okay.
I kidded my uncle all the time that I was too smart to go into the Marine Corps at that, and I didn't eat crayons.
So war was never on your radar whenever you joined the military, or was it?
No. It's always a possibility.
Right.
I don't think anybody.
Though.
I don't think. Well, with the exception of this war or World War II, I think with existing wars, people will join and know what they're getting into.
Right.
I joined at a time where anything could happen.
Right.
I mean, while I was in, we had Grenada and we had Beirut.
Right. So this is still under Reagan era. This is still the Cold War. The end of it, even.
Yeah.
Do you have any significant memories that are related to kind of the Cold War era, either in the military or growing up, even?
Not really. I mean,
Iran hostage situation.
Well, I was in high school for that. That was what, 74?
I think it was after that, but yeah.
Yeah.
But those events.
When Jimmy Carter was president.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was definitely high school for me.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get an understanding of is what was the atmosphere in the military like during this time, because I read a lot about this period being kind of the Vietnam syndrome. The military was still recovering ideologically from its the impact of Vietnam on the nation in many ways, and there was.
It's funny during that time. I think my only takeaway from Vietnam was Westmoreland was an idiot. He was an idiot with a big ego, and he was not a smart general. Yeah, that's really it. I don't recall.
Was there a sense of patriotism at the time whenever you joined the military?
Well, for me, actually there was. I mean, I thought that everybody should serve at least a couple of years. I thought it was the right thing to do. I can't tell you how I formed that idea, but I did.
Do you still have that idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the thing that's lacking now, though, I'm sure this is generational, because I think that my father probably thought that we were coddled, but I don't think there was enough adversity in childhood now. And it doesn't have to be brutality, just learning to cope with failure.
Mm-hmm.
Failure is how you grow. Anybody who gets it right the first time, they're not learning anything. Your most profound learning takes place when you make mistakes, when you fail.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want to admit it or not, you're gonna grow from it,
Mm-hmm.
or you're gonna let it destroy you.
Right.
So I think wrestling probably helped me more with failure. I wasn't instantly good at wrestling. I think in high school I was like 6'2" or 6'3", gangly. I was a beanpole. Oh, I think I have pictures on my phone when I was in high school. You'll see what I mean. I was thin. Um, and I had a mile of legs, which other wrestlers just love because they do trips, single leg takedowns. So I
Mm-hmm.
get really good at guarding that. But if you get knocked down, you get back up.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gone through life, it's been you get knocked down, you get back up, but it doesn't matter how long it takes. It's just as long as you get back up.
Right.
Some things knock you down harder than other things. And
Mm-hmm.
this current thing for me is what's really knocked me down. So getting back up has been a slow process, a lot of trial and error. Um, but as far as the war, the aftermath of the war, I don't remember much of that affecting me other than having my uncle come home
Mm-hmm.
in one piece, physically anyway. Um, I know when I was a kid, my dad and my brother Mike and I used to watch The World at War. I don't even know if it was a Time Life series. It was a show that was on
Mm-hmm.
that covered World War II,
Interesting.
and it was on at 7 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
and it was I can't remember if it was a half hour or an hour show. It was a great show though. It gave insights into what was happening, and I'm sure that a lot of it was newsreel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that interested me.
Right. Okay.
I don't know if that's one of those things that shaped my desire to serve, or if anything, I would have thought it to be an impediment to serving. But
You'd be surprised.
no, I know.
So, taking it back to your training, are there any significant events you wanted to talk about from your training to your graduation of basic training?
Um,
I hear a lot of stories, for example, in boot camp and Marines talking about the ways in which military training changes your personality, it changes your mentality, it changes the way you see the world. Did that same type of extreme transformation happen to you in the Navy?
no, it was all a game to me.
Mm,
It really was a game. They were playing to my strengths,
mhm,
so I always had a good eye for detail. Um, I learned that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It You learn something, you practice it slowly, and you develop a smoothness with what you're doing.
mm,
And as you do it more and more, you get better at it quicker.
right,
So slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
mhm,
They also teach you that when you're learning to handle a firearm.
mhm,
Do everything slow, make it smooth, smooth. As you do it more correctly each time, it becomes a smooth, quick operation.
mhm,
Um, it's like learning an instrument. It's not
mhm,
practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
mm,
Um, Same thing. Um, so yeah, and when we did PT, it was a joke.
mhm.
PT was a joke. I trained a lot harder in high school for wrestling. Um,
So, even though you thought somewhat of it as a joke, was there a sense of pride whenever you graduated?
I actually took more pride in being a member of the drill team. I joined the drill team. It
Okay.
was a rifle drill team.
Talk about that. What does that involve?
Um, Getting up early. It involved getting up early, going to the field house, meeting the chief. I think his last name was Harders, Chief Harders. He had missing a couple front teeth, but he used to run the drill team, and we learned how to function as a unit, and that was kind of cool. I mean, when you're a wrestler or even running cross country, it's a very individual thing. So for me, finding ways to fit into a team was actually kind of cool. From childhood, I think hockey was probably the closest I came to really feeling like I was on a team. But even then, it was just kids getting together and just slapping a puck around.
I would imagine that those skills help you adjust to life aboard a vessel, um, working as a unit.
Well, I think on a ship, especially a ship, it's imperative that everybody know how to do their job seamlessly. Because when you're under duress, um, in general quarters, the things that you train for combat, being able to do those things over and over and over again, and we drilled a lot. Um, Again,
So like fire drills and things like that.
um, well, we did mass casualty. We did the fires were usually a flight deck thing. You don't really see a lot of fires in the ship. Might be some electronic equipment,
Mm.
but I mean, you go through, you secure power, you identify,
Mm.
you identify the space, you find the power to the space, you shut it off, but knowing where to go. So you have procedures that you run through. They have um, planned maintenance for equipment. Everything has a list of things that you do. The planned maintenance schedules were how we would maintain our radios. As an electronics technician, I was a UHF tech.
Okay.
Um, but when we did the general quarters drills, we would go through entering a space that supposedly took a hit. So we'd be looking for wires that were dangling from the overhead that could be live.
And that's specific to your job.
Yeah.
So that's not like everyone is trained to do something like that. You have a
No.
specific task whenever there's an emergency as well.
We were, excuse me, we were in charge of spaces.
Okay.
And my job was in the island. So all of the spaces we would respond to were in the island.
Oh, okay.
And when we did the drills, I mean, we had 2 shops, but we were responsible for communications equipment on where the flight control was, up in the top level on the O11. I worked on the O6 level, on the O11 level was where that was.
What kind of vessel was this?
I was an aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier.
Yeah, I was on the Eisenhower.
And sorry to take a step back. How did you prepare for deployment on that vessel? And how long were you aboard it?
Well, preparing is, we would load our initial supplies if we needed anything. Our shops, like I kind of did this on my own. I would go to Radio Shack and buy components. They were pennies for like resistors, capacitors, but they're things that go. So I would buy resistors, capacitors, transistors. I would look for tubes that our radios used, because UHF is a high power radio. It's what they call line of sight communications.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be able to send out with your signal on a powerful carrier wave. So they use tubes, and we would look for tubes. I had a store of tubes. So rather than having to replace modules, we could just replace the tube if we knew the tube blew.
Okay.
So I think for maybe $30, I could load up the shop with components. Whereas if we had gone through the Navy purchasing on the ship, the parts cost a stupid amount more. It would be nothing to take that $30 in parts and spend $2,000 getting the same thing. So we were like, yeah, no, we're not doing that because it comes out of our shop's budget.
Right.
So we would just gather this stuff up before we left. Yeah, I started keeping track of what components failed and just went out. That's what I would usually buy. Or like with resistors, if you put them in parallel, you can get half. There are ways to fudge resistance by pairing or putting them in series. So you can mathematically figure out what you had. If you could get close to the original resistor's value, you could make it work.
How long did you go out usually?
About 6 months.
About 6 months.
6 to 8 months.
That seems to be, I don't know, it seems like that would create like a space where you would make friends and have a community.
I want to choke the shit out of somebody.
Did that ever happen? Or no?
Well, not physically, but there were, I had a guy in my shop who used to annoy the crap out of me. How he ever got through ET school was beyond me. He was the guy who went to the gym and he would just sit there and do curls. That's all he'd do. No, he wouldn't he wouldn't weight train. He'd just go there and do curls. And then he'd want to arm wrestle everybody. And I was, I had always trained as an athlete, so I was always trying to be well-rounded. And he just annoyed the crap out of me.
Did you develop friendships as well? Did you have a best friend on the show?
I did. I had one particular guy who he was a first class inmate chief. I remember the division officer was trying to hold him back from making chief, but the guy scored so high on his test. He was first on his chief's test, so they moved him up, even though this division officer was trying to hold him back.
Interesting.
Yeah, John Halstead. I still send him Christmas cards. We talk every once in a while.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy. There was another kid, Eric Geiselhart, that I kept in touch with for a while after we got out. Billy Munsell was a musician. He was a drummer. He and I stayed in touch just for a few years after. He always found his way into trouble. He was diminutive in stature, but his laugh made him big. He had a contagious laugh. He always had this way of getting himself into trouble. But yeah, beyond that, I talked to some people on Facebook.
Okay.
I found people on Facebook that I served with. And I talked to them. And, when all this came out about my MST, I was surprised that, the guy who was my shop supervisor, because I never knew you were suffering through this. And I said, I didn't either. For what it's worth, I didn't either, because I repressed it.
So I do want to talk a little more about that. Was this and this might as well be as good a time as any to talk about that. Was this a commanding officer?
Oh, no. This was, what the
Perp.
The Perp was he was a personnelman. He was a first-class personnelman who worked in the building where I went to ET school.
ET?
Electronics technician. I was at A school. I actually met him in the gym. He worked out a lot. He always lifted weights, and I was always on the mat drilling. I was still wrestling, so I was entering tournaments in the area.
So this was before your deployment?
Yeah, this is when I was in school. I didn't actually deploy on a ship until '83.
Okay.
So this is 1981. I I got to Great Lakes in the winter. All I remember, I was in the winter and I had left my pea coat in Florida. Big mistake. How I forgot to pack it, I don't know. But yeah, I got up there and I was frozen. The wind coming in off Lake Michigan is brutal. But yeah, my birthing area was right across the street from the gym.
Mm.
So it was like great. I lived on the third floor in the opposite corner. It was like grab my stuff, go across to the gym, work out, come back, shower, go eat.
Mm.
And up there, if you missed dinner, it wasn't a big deal because the food was horrible anyway.
Mm.
I don't think you could sustain farm animals with some of the stuff they served us. And I met Butch there, and he was friendly. He was charismatic, real nice, easy to get along with guy.
Mm.
And it was a long, slow, and in retrospect, insidious grooming period where he gained my confidence. We'd hang out. We'd go have a couple beers together. This one particular night, we were coming back from the Petty Officers Club, where we were walking back. His birthing area was like across the street from mine, and he had offered me a nightcap, and I said, "Yeah, sure." I was already wasn't feeling too bad, and I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And I don't know if he slipped me something or not, but that night he took advantage.
Hmm.
And you know what, it kills me. I like the things I can't remember. I can't remember his real name. That infuriates me.
So you just named him Butch?
That's his nickname.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He had gold tooth, aviator type glasses, jerry curled hair. He was from down south. He
Jerry
spoke.
Curl was this an African American man?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and he spoke very much in the vernacular of the '70s hip black male. I mean, he was very much in that vernacular. He called people jive turkey. Um, um, I remember the layout of his room. I mean, birthing compartments were pretty much, you'd walk in and it was a quad. You'd have 4 rooms in the quad.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived over on the right. You could walk in and I could tell you what his room was like. And it was weird. And down to how I got to where I was on my back, I couldn't tell you how I got there. I couldn't tell you how I got there. Yeah.
This was a one-time incident?
I think twice. For some reason, I think it was twice. And even then, I don't know how the second time came about, because you would think that I would have some memory of the previous time. It was just, I can't reconcile that, even though I'm fairly sure it was 2 times. Yeah, it was strange. It was really strange. I think the second time I had a girlfriend at the time too. And I've spoken to her about it. She didn't see anything.
And so
in me.
you've repressed this trauma, you said, for
32 years.
what reminded you or awoke that memory for you?
I was doing some work for the VFW, and I was the legislative chair for the state of Connecticut for the VFW, and I was put on the National Legislative Committee as the rep from the state of Connecticut, and my job as far as doing the Washington conferences was to organize visits with our legislators and to fill in the blanks where the people I would be escorting around would be state leadership, and they would all have their hot button issues that they'd want to talk about. My job was to fill in the blanks. And a couple of the things that never really gets touched on are women's health, which had become the VFW was really in the front in pushing the VAs to deal with women's health because women do have different health issues typically than men. And the other thing was addressing sexual assault. And I had been talking about that and talking about the effects of post-traumatic stress on combat troops versus troops that had been through sexual assault. And somewhere in talking about understanding, I'd been studying PTSD because for some reason people who have it or were talking to anyone about it were talking to me. And I didn't want to go in not knowing how to handle what was going on. So I became a good listener, but I'm explaining this to one of the congressmen, and I just blurted out. I said, I know I've been through this. And he said, well, are you all right? And I said, I don't know. I haven't spoken about this in 30 years. I said, what happened just came back right now. And he said, wow.
So there had been no memory of this in that 30-year period.
Right.
And it wasn't that you were just not talking about it, but that your brain had repressed that memory.
Yes, it was repression, not suppression.
Interesting. So you mentioned another really interesting thing, and that's that you had been talking to survivors of military sexual trauma before that memory had resurfaced for you.
Yeah, up to that point it was one. I was dealing mostly with combat people. I helped actually two people. And it was remotely that I was dealing with these people. I mean, one was in I believe Baltimore. The other one was she was down near D.C. And she was just a train wreck. I helped her get her claim filed. I hooked her up with a service officer from the VFW so she could file her claim. And the other guy was already in the forefront of... Yes.
I hate the lights.
He was already in the forefront of dealing with MST and trying to get the VA and the government to recognize MST and the effect it has on the people, and also to bring to light how prevalent it actually was.
And this is a male survivor as well.
Yes, he was actually the first male to testify before.
What was his name?
Brian Lewis.
Oh, yeah, I've interviewed Brian Lewis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's an attorney now.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. Powerful story as well.
Oh, yeah. What happened to him was horrible. You talked to Heath Phillips, too?
I haven't interviewed him yet, but I plan to.
Yeah. Heath he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He took over from me as the legislative director for men recovering from military sexual trauma. It was an organization.
Mr. MST.
Yeah, yeah. I was the legislative chair. Well, not chair, but I was the legislative VP or whatever.
So you were talking to a lot of survivors of PTSD. Had you been diagnosed with PTSD?
No,
And
no. I've had ADHD since I was a kid, and I found out later that having oppositional defiance is actually comorbid with ADHD. Um,
so the chronology of this interview is a little uh, entangled or a little complex.
yeah,
So I want to at some point I want to go back to your discharge and back to your service, but it seems to me that we could talk about how that trauma resurfacing in your life led to other complications. How did you cope with the resurfacing of that trauma at this time in 2013?
I drank.
Uh, Heavily,
Yeah,
for an extended period of time.
it was about 4 months.
Hmm.
I was drunk every day.
Did that affect your ability to do your job?
It affected everything. It affected my ability to do anything.
Uh,
I wasn't working. At the time, I was actually trying to become a professional advocate, which is much harder than it sounds.
hmm.
Um, there are professional advocates, but it's to crack into that niche is really a challenge.
How did this affect your family relationships?
It destroyed them.
In what ways?
Well, the you're talking my immediate family, right?
Your immediate family. Well, we haven't really. Are you married? Do you have children?
Yes.
And that family relationship, as well as maybe you're extended with your father, your
Well,
mother, your brothers.
why don't we go back to the week of the and start from there? The week that my memory came back.
Sure.
Um, just so you know, the following Wednesday, Brian testified.
Okay.
I had
Before
no idea that
Congress.
was I had no idea that that was coming up until after the fact. Um, I I had told every legislator I'd come in contact with what had happened while I was there working for the VFW, and I think the only one I wasn't able to tell was Chris Murphy because he was getting settled. He was a new senator. He wasn't. He started out as a representative, ran for senator, and won. So he was a new senator.
Was Gillibrand part of this process?
Actually, not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. Elizabeth Esty, I think, has probably taken the most sincere interest, but she's also my congresswoman.
Okay.
But when I first went into her office, she was also she was a freshman congresswoman. I spoke to one of her staffers, broke down, and I had left because she wasn't available. She Esty called me and said, if you can come in, I'd really love to talk to you. So I stayed an extra 2 days and went in and saw her that Friday. So I saw her, got in my car, I was all packed up and ready to go home. So I'm driving home and I started making phone calls. So I called Brian first and told him what happened. And then I talked to Sasha, the woman I helped. And she was like, whatever you do, don't drink. It's like, okay, too late. That whole week that I had been there, I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning drinking. But there were people who were up. There were a group of Ph.D. candidates for psychology who were staying in the hotel. They were at some kind of a conference. So, yeah, we were all drinking. And I would get up at 6, and I would shit, shower, and shave, throw on my suit, go back and do it all again. So I did that all week. I think my car got towed that year too. While I was down there. I was driving home on Friday, and like I said, I called them, those two, and then I started calling my brother. I called my brother Paul. I called my mom. Um, I remember talking to my mom. I had to pull over. I couldn't stop crying. It got to the point where the wind would shift and I would cry. It was horrible. Um, I stopped in New York. Uh, my brother Paul, my brother Mike lives in North Salem, New York. Uh, I I pulled over. We grabbed some lunch, and I told him everything. And Mike, being Mike, tried to put a spin on it that you're going to be fine. I was like, yeah, I don't think you understand the gravity of this. This is life altering. It's not. This is big, and I know it's coming. And I knew what was coming from having talked to all these other veterans. And I tried to head it off at the pass. You can't stop it. You can't. Even if you know it's coming, it seems to hit twice as hard because you're trying to prepare for it, and it gets you when you're not expecting it. That Monday, over that weekend, actually, I take that back. I got home after having lunch with my brother, and I told my wife, I brought my stuff upstairs. I said, we need to go grab a drink. She goes, why? I said, I need you right now. I've got to talk to you. Let's just go. Something happened while I was down there. And she goes, you're scaring me. I said, we're fine. Nothing really bad happened. I said, but we got to talk. I said, I've got to tell you what happened. And so we went out and had a drink, and I told her how everything had come back, and she was like, well, we're going to get through this. We'll be okay. I said, I tried to tell her, you don't understand. I said, this becomes something that takes your life over. And I said, even though I know what can happen, it's something that you can't stop. Short of being committed, I think. But throughout the weekend, I really thought I was losing my noodle. I really, I thought I was losing my mind. The following Monday or Tuesday, I went to the VA, and they told me that they couldn't help me because I didn't pass the means test. And I said, look, I told them what happened, and I said, I feel like I'm going crazy. I said, I really think I'm losing my mind. And I said, I'm not in a good place at all. And he goes, so you're claiming MST? I said, what's MST? Military sexual trauma. I said, yes. That's what I'm doing, yeah. Well, they got me upstairs, and they did a brief evaluation, and they brought me back the next day. They got me in a place where I could say, okay, I have something I could do now. Something to follow up with. So the next day I came back, and they finished an evaluation with me. I got a psychiatrist, and I remember just wanting to dump. I mean, I dumped everything with every person I met along the way. I just dumped everything. Again, I was like, I knew this happened to me, and my body reacted like I had just been raped in the congressman's office. I was more awestruck by the way it hit me. It was like I have no control over my body right now. It was really strange. And so while I'm explaining this to everybody, it's like I said before, it's like I was trying to get it off my body. I didn't want to acknowledge that it had happened to me. I just wanted it away from me, and I couldn't get it off of me. It's like sticky shit that you can't get rid of. It was just I couldn't explain it clearly enough to anybody unless they said it that way. And my psychiatrist said, well, what I want to do is I want to get a baseline. I want to see what your weight's like. Let's just get some vitals, and then we're going to focus on getting you some sleep because you're clearly not sleeping. So I want you to try to sleep. And I want to do something. He gave me something for the panic attacks. He gave me Xanax. And he gave me Zoloft for the depression and the anxiety as well. Well, so this is all within the span of a week. Wednesday comes, Brian testifies. And I just start looking for groups on Facebook to work with. Brian got me into a bunch of groups, and there were a few people who saved my life. I mean, they helped me make sense of stuff that didn't make sense. They said, we suspect this is what you're going through because we've been through it too. And you're not going crazy. But it's the first and probably the most painful part of healing. And there were 3 women, and Brian just kind of carried me for a little while. And the whole time I was reading as much as I could about MST. I watched The Invisible War 3 times. I cried a lot. I would just be out in public and I'd start crying. I had a really acute response to all this coming back. And even though I would take Xanax didn't work. So I'd just have a couple of drinks and it'd be gone. And I mean, like 2. I could have 2 cocktails, anxiety attack is gone. So it got to the point where once I had slowed down my drinking, in October of 2013, I went to a retreat at the Boulder Crest retreat down in Bluemont, Virginia. It's the first really organized retreat that they had there. It was 2 weeks and it was intense. We did EMDR. We learned to do transcendental meditation. We did yoga. We went kayaking. We did group therapy. We did, nights by the fire, decompression from the days, because the days were intense. They were emotional. Some of us were journaling. I struggled with journaling. That was not my thing. And I left there thinking I was in a decent place. They had all the significant others come down for the last day or 2. And they were put up in a hotel. We were still at the retreat. And it was funny. I remember from the get-go, my wife was treating it like it was a vacation. And it was anything but. I think by then she was sick of me drinking too. So that, when I got to Boulder Crest, we weren't allowed to drink, smoke, any of that. I don't smoke, so it wasn't a big deal, but it didn't bother me. I was fine without drinking. I had something to take the place of it. So when I got out, my drinking was less. I was doing TM a lot.
TM?
Transcendental meditation. Which is actually really remarkable. I started doing it again, and it's like finding quiet space.
Yeah.
In my house, consistently, it's impossible. It really is impossible.
You have some water there if you need it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have allergies. It's like, ugh. Actually, that's a great idea. You have such good ideas. You're so prepared. So anyway, that's like the first year.
And so at first it was a problem. There were problems with your marriage. Were those overcome?
No. Well, they've persisted in a lot of ways. Have only gotten worse.
But you're still married
for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what happened is I withdrew from everyone, everything. I didn't leave the house unless I had to go to the VA. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. By then, I'm going to say after October. I think it was after October. I had gotten a therapist at the vet center. The vet center is an adjunct to the VA, mm-hmm. But do you know about them?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay.
I do.
Vet centers operate independently from the VA, mm-hmm. And information only flows one way. It flows from the VA to the vet center, but never back.
Okay.
And certainly not without the permission of the client. Mm-hmm. There are times when it was useful for my psychiatrist and my therapist to talk. So I was good with that. It's like, look, all I want to do is get better. I want my life back. Mm-hmm. And after a while, my therapist had suggested that I start doing some group therapy. It turned out to be really useful. But again, I got into group therapy and I don't. Right. And, it was really, I don't know, it was oddly reassuring to hear the combat guys say, I'm glad I got what I got. I would never wish what you're dealing with on anybody. So I felt validated. I didn't feel like a whiny bitch. I mean, I felt validated.
So these communities in which vet centers in which first off, I thought most of the people who went to vet centers were combat veterans, right?
Most are.
But they welcomed you to their community, and
they take MST people as well.
Okay.
The vet centers were started by Vietnam veterans, mm-hmm. Who didn't trust the VA system, and justifiably so at that time. Back then, the VAs were in terrible shape. Mm-hmm. They were really terrible shape. So the vet centers, their goal was to help each other through it.
But the actual community, the group, the people who are seeking counseling, there was community and camaraderie and solidarity between combat veterans with PTSD and MST. Survivors.
My group therapy wasn't there. My group therapy was back at the VA in a different program. They do have veteran programs in this case in Rocky Hill. Mm. It was far to travel. Right. If I was lucky enough to have a therapist appointment, the group is going on after that. Okay, that was cool. But normally, I just did my therapy, got some Girl Scout cookies, and went home.
I guess what I'm getting at, and you mentioned this very briefly earlier, is how do other veterans respond to your experiences, your MST, you're identifying very actively with MST?
I think part of it is disbelief, and I don't mean it. It's more like awe-inspired disbelief because they see I'm a big, muscular guy, and they're like, man, if it could happen to you, it could happen to any of us. And I said, well, that's kind of the point. I said, it's not always that violent overtaking of one person versus another. Sometimes it's pernicious and insidious, like my case was, where it was a slow grooming, where the person befriended me and then waited until I was at a weak point and betrayed that trust. Mm-hmm. I think that's even, I just think it's more insidious than a violent act even. Mm-hmm. It's, my trust issues they still with me. I still have trouble trusting people. And what I've done to combat that is I live my life more out loud now. I'm more open. Mm-hmm. And if everything's out there, nobody can use anything against me because they already know. I'm not trying to hide it. When when I started withdrawing from my family, I spent a lot of time online, I told you.
Mm-hmm.
My wife would expect me to get better, like on her terms,
Mm-hmm.
like it was an inconvenience to her. It was like, if I don't take care of me, I'm not going to be able to reintegrate into this family.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen. I'm just going to get worse. So you can go along for the ride or not. And there were a couple of times I wanted to kill myself. One day I was seconds away from doing it, and I couldn't find the ammunition for the pistol. So I couldn't load it quickly enough. I remember I threw the pistol out the window. It broke the window, throwing it through the window. That was a tough night. I slept outside, froze. It was cold. But everything, she has patience up to a point, but if it's not going as fast as she wants, she would bust my ass about it. And it's like, look, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying. And there it went for 3.5 years. My psychiatrist was pushing me to get a job. I was trying to find work. I got a job. A friend of mine offered me a job at his convenience store or gas station. I was there a day and I had a panic attack that I just could not. I was behind a counter. I had nowhere to go. And I felt I couldn't. I was hyperventilating. I mean, I was having a really bad time. And I thanked him. I said I can't do it. I'm not ready. And he was like, "That's okay. It's okay. No harm, no foul." So yeah, it was nice for him to do that though. So I went back to, even if I went into a bar to have a couple of drinks, I would sit away from people and people would start pissing and moaning about stuff that to me was just stupid bullshit. It's just so trivial compared to what was going on in my head. I get pissed or disgusted and just leave. I just leave.
Have you ever reacted violently or with aggression as a result of dealing with those traumas? Not self-destructive, but toward others?
No, but I've pretty much dared people to start something. Like when I went to my first group at the VA and I told them everything that I laid out everything that had happened. I was just daring someone to say something. Without daring someone to say something, it was like, please, somebody just start something with me. I've, for the most part, been pretty good at containing my anger. I generally don't get angry. Or, I have a friend at Smith College who has told me that she feels an undercurrent of rage with me. And it's like, I don't feel it though. It's not something I feel. She goes, something's going to uncork it and you're going to flip. And it's like, I don't get this because I'm not feeling it. And I don't know. I never got into a fight with somebody. I had some overlap. I did have a job working as a bouncer the bar around the corner from my house.
Mm.
The owner is a friend of mine, and he was concerned about an element that was coming into the bar and trying to set up a home. Um, and he asked if I would be willing to work the doors on Thursdays and Saturday nights, because that's when it was happening. And through all of this, the only time I had to actually walk somebody out was my brother-in-law, who outweighs me by 100 pounds and is 2 inches taller than me. Yeah, he was the only person I ever walked out. Everybody else, it was like, you can't talk to a drunk,
Right.
especially when you're 6'4" and 270 pounds. You can talk to anybody. I think the toughest thing I ever had to deal with was 2 women who were at each other, and it was like, ew.
So I'm curious how you deal with or have received reactions from the public about your claims of MST. Have you reacted, or have the reactions been hostile, or do you feel at all stigmatized being a man who is an advocate for other survivors of MST?
No, actually, I believe I come across as credible. I don't let my emotions get the best of me when I talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem I have, is being high functioning,
Mm-hmm.
even the way I deal with depression. I testified in front of last year in front of the Joint Caucus from the House Armed Services Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they said you have 5 minutes. I took 15 or 20, but oops.
Okay.
But even then, I felt like I came across as credible. I was very, I could tell watching the video. There were times when I was affected,
Mm-hmm.
and so I would ramble. It's funny when you're talking about this stuff. Sometimes your mind starts to process while you're talking, and it's like, no, you can't do that. You just got to let it out. And I would have to stop and correct course. But that's also how I wound up speaking for 20 minutes.
Do you often find that after you talk about it, that it's you have to cope with it, like that evening, for example, or does it resurface that trauma for you and make it challenging to deal with?
Not so much. Not anymore.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like I said, it's funny. I talk about it, and it's just I talk about it.
Is it therapeutic for you to talk about it with other people?
Not knowingly. My reasons for talking about it were to help other people who were suffering. The worst thing that I remember is feeling alone, especially having a repressed memory of what happened. I'm thinking, all these people that I know in this circle, none of them have repressed memories. This is all fresh in their mind from the moment it happened.
Right.
Who's going to believe me? And then I said, fuck it. I don't care. You're going to hear what happened. And if you really want to challenge me on it, well, we can step outside. I'm good with that. I don't like violence, but I'm not afraid to get bloody.
What do you find most challenging day to day by living with this trauma?
Feeling like there's going to be an end to having to cope with it. I just want my life back. I want my life back. I was a quality engineer in aerospace, and I left that because I wanted to be. I really was into doing the veterans advocacy work. I loved it.
Mhm.
I knew that when I spoke to a member of Congress, they listened to me. I made cogent arguments that were worthy of being listened to,
Mhm.
rather than just rambling about, not getting my pills on time
Mhm.
at the VA pharmacy, or,
Right.
that my primary care physician doesn't listen to me. He's just checking boxes off. And that's not. I'm. How can what I'm going through benefit the most people possible?
Mhm.
Because I don't want anybody to have to go through this if it can be avoided.
What advice would you give someone who is dealing with either a recent trauma or a recent resurfacing of that trauma?
Uh, know that you're not alone.
Mm.
You're as much as it feels like what you're going through is unique. It's not. It's happened to a lot of people before you, and it's going to happen to people after. Um, and there are places to get people who will listen to you or just be with you. I mean, for some people, talking about it is way too painful. Um, Especially if you're dealing with a repressed memory and it just comes back, everything's raw. It's like having a Band-Aid ripped off. It's tenfold worse, but it just exposes all your nerves.
Mm.
Um, like I said, your body reacts like the act just happened. Um, I had a client in the DDIOP I was working in who had repressed what happened to her for 2 years. And it came back, and it was, she was labile. Um, the slightest thing would set her off crying.
Mm.
And um, she was in so much pain, just so much psychic pain. That while as therapists we learn to make sparse use of self,
Mm.
learning that there's a time to use self. Um, I remember going up to her at the end of the day that she really broke down and said, I want you to know that you're definitely not alone.
Mm.
People like us think that we are,
Mm.
but we get through it. And this is just something that will pass.
Mm.
And you can't get help for this. Now, the reason I said something is because the two therapists who were there, they took off. And they left her in a place where she shouldn't have been before she left.
Mm.
I know if I had been left to that, I would have probably gotten drunk and driven.
Mm.
Could have hurt somebody else reasonably.
Mm.
Um, and she was so I sat with her and talked with her until she was ready to go. And I took heat from it from my supervisor. When I was like, you left, your counterpart left, and here's a client who's getting ready to leave, who's labile
Mm.
and not thinking straight. What would you have had me do?
Mm.
Having seen this, we should have come and got me. I said, what if she left in between that time that I went to get you?
Mm.
What do we do? So I reasoned through it fairly well. I said, look, this is what I did.
Mm.
And I think my use of self was good at that time. But yeah, just knowing you're not alone is so important.
I think that a lot of the American public, or at least I hope that, or I like to think that a lot of the American public wants to support veterans and does care about veterans after they come home. Um, in what ways do you think that they can help understand the challenges of veterans dealing with MST?
Believe them.
Mm.
Believe them. Don't doubt them. I've only heard of one case in all the people that I've heard from or know, I've only heard one case where the claim of rape was false. And it was a case where a marriage was falling apart and the dependent spouse used rape to get her husband in trouble.
These lights are driving me crazy. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
So
don't apologize for something you don't have control over.
That's good advice, actually. 2017 has seen a lot with women coming forward with testifying to their own history of being survivors of rape or sexual assault. What the Me Too movement is what I'm referring to. What similarities or differences are there between military veterans who have really led the charge since about 2010, really?
Yeah. I think even as back as 2008.
Right.
Yeah.
Who have been coming forward and testifying before Congress about the prevalence of military sexual trauma. What similarities are there between veterans and non-veterans in those regards?
Well, I think not being believed, not feeling like what you have to say will have credibility or stack up against the perpetrator or the perpetrator's friends. I think there's a power structure in place that intimidates victims in general. I think the major difference with the military is that as a victim there, you're not only going to be disbelieved and I take that back. They may believe you, but they won't do anything about it. You have nowhere to run when you're in the military. You're in the military. You got nowhere to go unless you go AWOL.
And this question might not be as relevant to your personal experiences, but I know that you know a lot about military sexual trauma by advocating in your roles in communities. What do you think can be done to improve those situations or resolve those problems?
I think that sexual assault in general needs to be reframed as a genderless crime. And, well, you and I might know that it's an abuse of power. It's treated like a sex crime because sex is involved.
Right.
This is an abuse of power. And if you take any permutation of genders, and then that's everybody. Any permutation of genders, sexual assault can occur. It's the abuse of power of one person over another person, or a group of people over a person, or a group of people.
So you're saying that rape has more to do with power rather than sex?
Yes. And until it's reframed like that, I don't think anybody's going to take it seriously. Part of me thinks that people who don't believe it happens can't conceive of it happening because it's such an affront to how they see the world.
Right.
But those people are the people who are the biggest victims. They're the ones who don't see it coming. The one other thing about the military too is the sense of betrayal. You go into an organization where the esprit de corps is it's us versus them, and the moment that boundary is crossed, it becomes me versus everybody, and it changes the whole dynamic of how that victim can function in that arena. I don't think that happens so much in the civilian world. Don't get me wrong, the sense of betrayal is universal. You've had a boundary crossed that you thought was inviolate, and it gets crossed, and like me, I froze when it happened to me. I dissociated. My memory of it is like me viewing what happened from up over the actual act.
Do you think that the military justice system punishes survivors of rape?
Yes.
In what ways?
There's retribution. There's also retaliation, and this is again where I think it's different from the civilian world, where if someone says they're assaulted, if they assume someone has accused me as a platoon sergeant of raping them, well, I've got a whole group of people here who are loyal to me because I'm their platoon sergeant. This person's going to get ostracized. This person's going to get punished. They're going to get beat. They're going to have their lives threatened. Mm-hmm. And that's a lonely place to be. It's a frighteningly lonely place. How my thinking through this whole advocacy process is, how do you get inside a legislator's head to make them feel? I mean, they have to choose to feel, but how do you make them feel that moment of vulnerability? Mm-hmm. How do you create that universally for people? That's been my boggle. I want to get in their heads. I want them to feel that vulnerability and feel how unsettling it is and how nerve-wracking it is. How do you paint that picture? You know, you're in an organization where there is nowhere to run. No one to hide. People turn on you. People you thought were your friends, they'll turn on you. Battle buddies have turned on battle buddies who have been raped. Now, that's usually a pairing. All the anti-crime, well, all the anti-sexual assault stuff is all, a lot of it is still, ask her first. It's still all very gender specific, male to female. I have a good friend who was raped by a woman. She was an officer. He was an E7. And she abused her power and she raped him. She used him for sex. He is probably in the worst mental shape of anybody I know. It destroyed him. It destroyed him. He lives in the woods now. He's got a perimeter. He's got a cabin in the woods. He's got 2 perimeters. And he'll shoot whoever comes on his property if he doesn't know they're coming.
What do you think it is about military culture that promotes what some might argue is a rape culture?
That's funny. I did a paper on this at Smith. It's the machismo in the culture. It's a very testosterone-laden culture. It's very us versus them. It's very, it's macho. It's a macho culture. And they're training people to be killers and to let loose that part of themselves that's primal to dominate. And I don't think that it's taught in a manner it's the most efficient way to get in touch with that part of yourself. It's not the best way. If you're going to train to do something, know it's coming and then train harder than what you're going to experience. And when you're actually experiencing, it's going to be like, so knowing when to turn on that aggression. This is one of the reasons I think I do maintain fairly good control of tense physical situations. I was a wrestler for 23 years. I spent most of my life doing martial arts. And I know that I can defend myself. But I also know the more that I've learned, the more I need to learn. And the more I learn, the less I need to be physical. Because when you know what you're capable of doing, why would you do it when you don't need to, when you can talk your way out of it? I think this is one of the things that made me an effective bouncer. You can't talk to a drunk.
So for veterans who are trying to readjust from this culture, from this very violent and aggressive mentality, how do those instincts become unlearned? How can they readjust to a civilian society where the same rules don't apply? Or there are different rules that apply?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about people who are incarcerated or people who are heading towards incarceration,
well, ideally, it's for veterans who can readjust to a society without falling into the problems of incarceration, right?
Well, I think some of that's out of their control. For a lack of a better way of putting it, civilian culture is sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
It's sloppy, and military is very ordered. Coming out into a world where the boundaries they're fuzzy.
Mm.
I think that reorienting a military person who's becoming a civilian, I think that the boggle is going to be, how do you get them to feel comfortable with figuring out how to establish their own boundaries, and understanding how other boundaries might be fuzzy, but you can firm them up yourself.
You know, as you talk, it makes me think of the order that is established in the military and the same order that is imposed in prison, that there may be similarities or parallels between people who are institutionalized in prison life and they try to readjust to the chaos that is in the civilian world, and they have problems overcoming that readjustment. And it's because of that organization, that structure.
Well, you're also stepping back into a world of people who don't take responsibility for their own feelings.
Mm.
I describe it as, you can't make me mad. It's my choice to get mad.
Mm.
So when someone says, well, he pissed me off, it's like, you chose to be pissed off. Or, what you told me offended me. It's like, being offended is a choice.
Right.
I go through this at school. I'm an older person with a lot of lived experience, and dealing with younger people who are still in that, well, what you're saying is offensive. To whom? And, it's that person's choice to be offended. Or being in a collegial setting, why don't we talk about it? If what I'm saying is an affront, let's find that middle ground where in this collegial setting we can find if it's hypersensitivity to something, or if I'm really being brutish and insensitive myself.
Mm. Since you brought it up, I know that you were in a master's program at Smith, mm-hmm. right? And I've talked to combat veterans who have gone back to the university, and they have problems readjusting to that type of environment, and just even interacting with the average college student who's maybe 18 to 22. Did you experience those difficulties as well?
In my undergrad, I was a leader. I was a student leader. My freshman year, I got elected student government president, which was usually a position that somebody who's a junior going into their senior year would do.
This was before the traumas had resurfaced, right?
Right, yeah. I was a trustee of the university system. I got elected into that. I sat on the university foundation. Like I said, I was a student leader. And I was on the wrestling team.
Very
in
active.
College. Yeah, I was to a fault. I was active, yeah. I played that game really well. I was in my element there. Yeah, I was in my element. Now, at the master's program, the first thing I insisted on doing for myself was, I will not take a leadership position. I'm here to learn. This is all I'm going to do. And by not taking a leadership position, I found myself in a leadership position, because I was the one who would pose really uncomfortable questions. I would say the things people were afraid to say, but I mean, constructively. It would be, there are things people avoid because they're too uncomfortable to deal with. But as therapists, these are things that are going to come up all the time. So why aren't we training for that now? So I have that mentality of train harder than what you're going to be facing. So school is where you deal with the really hard shit. When I got to Smith, no, let me preface that. I'm, like I said, I'm a very open person, very live and let live. And most of the things that I face as a straight white guy at Smith are all the things I'm vilified for, being a straight white guy. You know, I am the oppressor on so many counts, but I'm not that guy in reality. So I got to Smith. I really, well, I don't have the experience of being transgendered. I'm very sympathetic to it. I mean, I can't, I'm certainly, with the experiences of my classmates who were transgendered, I was empathetic. I couldn't find close parallels in my own head about how hard it's got to be. I, you know, people's sexual orientation, again, love's love. No, all of this stuff is just, it's non-issue for me. Same thing with race, non-issue for me. Are there things by virtue of me being white that I may not recognize? Yeah, but that's one of the things I'm there to learn. You know, so fine, I'm great. Challenge me on that. So when I got to Smith, you know, here I am. I'm very open to all this, and I knew what I was stepping into, but I had no idea how it was going to be just, well, not just thrust upon me, but in the face. And it was, I felt really alone. That, and I was the only veteran in my class. So I was surreal, and I did feel alone. I had him, and I sat by myself, back against the wall, all the time. Didn't really talk much unless I got into class. I participated in classes, and in a lot of cases, that's what saved some of my grades, was my class participation. I knew what I was talking about, but, you know, I was also in an uncomfortable milieu where I didn't, you know, I have my bachelor's in mathematics, not in any of the humanities, so I'm stepping into a world that is not, that it's new to me. So not understanding or knowing what was expected when I wrote, that was a challenge for me, or knowing how to engage, because there were clearly people who were younger who had been doing this work, and they wielded it like a sword. It was with some of them, it's like one-upsmanship. And all I'd have to do is say, well, in my experience as a client, this is the reality. So,
how do you think that your trauma had affected your ability to succeed at the graduate level in the university?
It was evocative. The program was really evocative, and I had issues with dissociating while I was writing. I was defensive sometimes in class, but I would intellectualize it and attack that way. I just didn't engage all those things that were challenging for other people. I didn't engage in the racial stuff. I avoided the crowds when they protested. I didn't get into the fights over transgender or sexual orientation or race. It's like you're protesting against the people who are on your side. So for me, it just allowed me to pull back. Or made it easier for me to pull back. I have one friend who is a Ph.D. candidate at Smith, and she introduced herself to me. She introduced herself as the biggest dyke on campus, which Terry's awesome. She's a Native American. She's a great soul, and I wound up sitting with her, and she basically met me to meet the dog, but that's what she tells everybody. But I made really good friends with some faculty. It was. I think that when I went into classes, my experience with my trauma and was able to inform reality for not only my fellow students, but some of my professors, because they have this fixed idea of what PTSD is. And I could say, no, PTSD is an umbrella. PTSD is an umbrella for all these other things. If you've got PTSD, any or all of these things can occur. So PTSD, major depression is almost certainly comorbid with it. Acute anxiety is another. Even though PTSD is an anxiety disorder, acute anxiety is part of it. Acute anxiety disorder becomes PTSD over time. That's how. PTSD, I think, is either 3 or 6 months. I forget what the DSM says, even though I hate it.
So I ask this question to almost every veteran for the past 5 years, and especially those who've undergone significant trauma. How has your experiences in the military, or your remembrances of your military experience, in your case, impacted your understanding of American exceptionalism or patriotism or politics even?
It disgusts me.
And
it's disgusting because I know that when we go to war, we're not fighting for our freedom. I think that's bullshit. If somebody tried to take over our country and we went to war over that, that's protecting our freedom. The other thing, Afghanistan is retaliation. Iraq was, that was a money thing. God knows what. Especially since we helped him, Saddam Hussein, get into power. So,
do you think that those viewpoints have changed over time for you?
No. When, like, kneeling during the national anthem, well, that's disrespectful. It's like they're exercising their constitutional right. That's what we fought to protect. We took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, not the Pledge of Allegiance, not the national anthem. Those are just symbols. The Constitution is what we protect. Anything that's in the Constitution. So when they kneel in protest, do I like it? It doesn't matter if I like it or not. I like that they have the freedom to do that, as untasteful as it is to someone else. I'm sorry, distasteful. And I don't care if they're being paid. You know, they get paid to play football. They don't get paid to stand or sit for the national anthem. It was actually the armed forces that actually brought that in as a recruiting tool. They pay the NFL to do the national anthems. So it's a recruiting tool. So people are getting pissed off about a recruiting tool. I think we're going down a slippery slope, because I have a whole bunch of things that contribute to that way of thinking, that nationalism. You know, if you really love your country, then you have to allow your country to be what it's supposed to be, not what you think it's going to be or should be. Fall back. Be willing to fall back on the Constitution and fall back on the Constitution. Right? Just be willing to do that and say, I don't like it, but more power to them. But that requires people to be grown-ups and to think a little bit more beyond their day-to-day life. And I think that people have just lost the will to think for themselves. It's a lot easier to lead people now than it ever was. People live in rhetoric, and when I hear it, I just kind of run.
So how does it make you feel whenever you hear someone say, like, support the troops, or...
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. I never want to see what happened to Vietnam veterans happen again. You know, they went where their government sent them.
Let me rephrase that question. How does it make you feel whenever someone thanks you for your service?
That's awkward. That's awkward. I think I've resolved to saying thank you for saying so. Or I can't say it was my pleasure.
Mm.
That's disingenuous. Just thank you for saying so.
What are some substantial ways that people can actually support the troops rather than just putting on a bumper sticker on their car or changing their
Well, they
Facebook
can actually
profile?
do it. Well, like a good friend's son joined the army and was stationed in a remote part of Afghanistan where they barely got their mail.
Mm.
They got ammunition, but they had no cleaning kits for their weapons. What do you do to clean your weapon? You don't clean your weapon jams. Your weapon jams, you don't have a viable tool. So we sent cleaning kits back with him when he came home on leave. My VFW post bought cleaning kits. And multi-caliber cleaning kits. I mean, everything was, we made sure they had the cleaning fluid, patches, everything they needed to clean. First aid stuff. They had sparse first aid stuff. So being able to stop infection over there is paramount. So disposable scalpels. The things that we often overlook, allow them to come home. Give them the best chance of coming home. Support them that way. Do the things for them that they can't do for themselves over there. Right. So, like buying those cleaning kits is it may sound silly. It's one of those dumb things that helps them come home. Give them a shot to have a life. When they return home, give them the latitude to readjust. If they have mental health issues, don't be so quick to judge them. A lot of the major mental health concerns occur between the ages of 17 and 24. So if someone is going to develop schizophrenia or become schizoaffective, it happens then. Personality disorders of a type, they may flourish in that age span, but a lot of them are developed in childhood. So that's one of the tools the military uses to discharge people. So they can't get VA benefits. They're off the government's nickel, which is shitty. They did that with Brian Lewis. They've done that to a lot of MST people. Said they had a borderline personality disorder and got rid of them. Although now, if you claim MST, it doesn't matter what your disposition discharges, you get treated. So,
two things. You brought up twice now VFW, and I know from our pre-interview that your discharge status prevented you from being able to join veterans organizations. So I want to talk about that, and I know that this is going to backtrack a little bit, but hopefully we have time to talk about this. I wanted to talk about your discharge.
All right.
And the circumstances that led to that discharge and how that impacted your life.
Okay. Well, first of all, you have as much time as you need me for, so that's...
Do you need to take a break or anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. When... like I said, hindsight's 20/20. I know that everything that was put into play by me to get out of the service was born of my trust issues. When this division officer, whom I didn't particularly like, but he apparently saw promise in me, he moved me to another division where I was going from being just a radio repairman to becoming a calibration tech. And being a cal tech is like the upper echelon of being an electronics technician, because you're calibrating everything that ETs use to test their gear. So in my berthing area originally, I had a nice corner rack. I had privacy. It was, I had a box made that I could put at the head of my rack and put my pillow on, because being tall, the rack's only 6 feet tall or long. So I was able to extend my sleeping space.
Mm.
So when I got moved, I couldn't do that.
Mm.
So even though I had a bottom rack, I had trouble adjusting. I rebelled. Oppositionally defiant. And I felt like I was being dealt with as an inconvenience to my division. And so I got moved to this other division, and it was like, fuck this. I'm done. So I bought some weed from somebody. I let everybody know I had it. I made a homemade pipe, and I set myself up to get thrown out. Mm-hmm. Back then, they had their zero tolerance thing. So here I am. I'm an ET2, and I got busted down to E3 before I got kicked out. So I'm with the same rank I came in with. But yeah, I got busted. They ran me through like getting piss tested, and it came up negative. The baggie of weed had no fingerprints on it. The pipe had no fingerprints on it. I was like, prove it's mine. I knew it was going to happen, but it was in my rack. So they tried to get me with intent to distribute, but there wasn't enough to distribute. So I stood in front of the new captain, the ship's captain, he was a tool. And he basically said, "You're aware of what's going to happen?" I said, "You're aware of the Navy's zero tolerance policy?" I said, "Yes, sir." And the whole time, my uniform's crisp, my shoes are spit shined. That was the other thing. I didn't ever wear the patent leathers. I always shined my shoes. Mm-hmm. My uniforms were always perfect. And he mentioned, he goes, "You're an awful squared away for someone who's about to be thrown out of the Navy." He goes, "Do you do the special?" I said, "This is how I look every day." He said, This is me." Didn't matter. He threw me out.
So were you at all advised to take another than honorable discharge by any type of JAG lawyer?
Actually, I don't remember. I don't remember. Remember, the JAG officer I dealt with was really nice. He was really nice. Cordial.
So the court proceedings, this type of offense would have led to like a court martial, though, right?
No. It's called non-judicial punishment.
Okay.
And it's an administrative separation. Okay. So it's not a criminal separation.
Would it be considered a punitive discharge, though?
I don't know if it's non-compliance or if it's punitive, even though the action itself was punitive. I'm not sure. I think the punitive action was in the forfeiture of pay and the imposition of extra duty. Okay. I believe the actual separation was the failure to meet the terms of a policy set forth by the Secretary of the Navy.
Was there any incarceration involved with your punishment? No. What's the actual terminology used to describe? Is it general under honorable?
General under other than honorable conditions.
And what other type of long-term consequences come with a discharge like that?
Bitterness.
From the military?
No, from me. I was pissed off. I had re-enlisted in July. By December, I was out. I was pissed because I felt like I had been betrayed.
Although you set yourself up for the charge?
Yeah, well, yes. But like I said, in retrospect, what this person was trying to do for me was actually to help me grow. There was nothing punitive about it. It was just a pain in the ass, and I behaved like a little kid about it. But also, looking back, I know that by the time I had gotten in, my trust issues were firmly ensconced.
Mm.
I went through it when I started out as a Navy nuke. They found that I had ADHD, which at the time could also have been PTSD because they present almost identically. Um, I got dropped from the nuclear power school because they found that I had ADHD. So they were going to put me out of the Navy, and the short of it is I tried out for SEALs and got into a BUDS class, and I was in class 121. And I got there, and I, again, had a lot of trust issues. I'm looking back at all this and going, shit. It's now it all makes sense.
Mm.
It's like, man, I've been living all this time fucked up from something I was not aware of directly.
The repressed trauma.
Yeah. Self-sabotage. God. Self-sabotage was just horrible. It was like I would get in trouble just to see if I could get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just horrendously stupid for someone who's so smart.
So, whenever you were discharged from the military, what about your discharge status affected your ability to get like a VA home loan or counseling services or disability compensation? Were you prevented from getting those benefits?
At that time, yeah.
And then you got it upgraded whenever you went to college, correct?
Yes.
How did you get it upgraded? Because I read statistically like it's next to impossible to get your discharges upgraded.
Well, I there was a Vietnam vet who worked at the Department of Labor, the Connecticut Department of Labor branch where I live, and he asked me, he had asked me what my discharge was, and I told him, I think the first thing we're going to do is get that upgraded.
Mm.
So, oh, okay. So,
After how many years?
um, 8, maybe 8 years after. But in that time, in that 8 years, I had gone back to doing community service. I had been a leader at school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I rubbed elbows with some really well-regarded people,
Okay.
all of whom had written letters of recommendation for me, attesting to my character
Mm.
and how I contribute, the impact of my contributions. And while I could have refuted the charges based on the lack of evidence,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I just took the general under honorable and was happy with it. The and when they wrote the letter back, they said that we're agreeing to the upgrade based on um, this former member's apparent um, what do they call it, rehabilitation,
Mm.
and all the great gains he's made since he left the service, and which actually it wasn't fluff. It was like these are things I actually did. So
Right.
um, I got it. They upgraded it,
Mm.
but I'm still an RE4. I can't reenlist. No, I'm too old. But
So, had you tried to join veterans organizations? You seem to show a lot of enthusiasm and wanting to contribute to the veteran causes.
I
I guess what I'm asking is, did you feel stigmatized by your discharge status during that time?
didn't really think about it.
Mm.
The veteran who helped me get my upgrade thought about it more than I did at the time.
Okay.
He said, "But this is going to open up a whole new world to you."
Mm.
So as soon as it was, boom! I got a tax. I got a tax reduction. I got um, I did have all these other things open up to me.
But you didn't qualify for the GI Bill, right?
No, no. But I had a veteran scholarship to Smith.
Mm.
You know, that's open to honorably discharged veterans,
Right.
which I think might be erroneous.
Mm.
I mean, if someone has a dishonorable discharge, no, I can see that.
Right.
But getting a general under other than honorable, understanding the backstory for a lot of people is essential.
Mm.
Because there are people with OTHs that didn't deserve them. They were a victim of circumstances. Like people who were raped and did go off the reservation, you know, to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who was beaten within an inch of her life. I mean, she was almost beaten to death, and because she turned her commanding officer, or not her commanding officer, it was like her squad leader, her next in command, because he had raped her. She was beat within an inch of her life by a bunch of guys in her platoon. So,
and she had an OTH.
I don't remember hers. I don't remember hers.
But the point sticks that like it's to protect themselves, right?
Yeah.
Heath Phillips, for example.
Yeah, Heath is a great example.
Right.
How he's come back from his. He was even darker than I was. I think he was incarcerated. He's a strong person.
Yeah.
He's a strong person. I have some good friends who are survivors. They're strong people.
Well, it seems to me that despite the circumstances, you've been successful. I mean, those letter of recommendations, I can see very clearly how you've had success at an academic level and your advocacy for other veterans, and those are all very noble. I do have a spontaneous question, if you will, and I do often ask this question too. What do your tattoos symbolize? And it's two-part, and how do you memorialize?
Well, I got this.
Oh,
This is my family coat of arms. I got this back in 1982 after I left Buds.
Mm.
I had seen my family coat of arms in the one of the shops of the Hotel del Coronado, and I liked it. And so I verified it with my grandmother to make sure that this was actually it.
Yeah.
And because there's one with a white shield. So this I got. I remember my mother goes, "What did you do to your arm? You got a tattoo." My father was like, "Well, it's your arm." I got this in early July.
Is that a semicolon?
Yeah.
For suicide?
Yeah.
And what does the other?
I got your 6.
Oh, I got your 6.
Yeah. And I have one on my back. That's it's a form of Japanese calligraphy. It's called shoto, and it's the most artistic expression of Japanese calligraphy that basically translates to every action holds the possibility for enlightenment. And it runs the length of my spine. I got that in July also. That was basically 3 hours of talking to God. That was right down the spine. I felt every needle prick. It was, and yeah, the artist says, "Well, I have kind of a heavy hand." I said, "Well, it's not going anywhere, is it?"
So the semicolon, is that more in reflection of your own struggles or veteran suicide more generally?
Both.
Both?
Yeah, it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that I always liked tattoos, and it was always my intention to get a sleeve once the kids grew up. So,
how old are your kids?
My daughter just turned 29, and my son just turned 26.
Did your outspoken advocacy of military sexual trauma and testifying to your own experiences, did that shape your relationships with them in any way, do you think?
they felt like my involvement with veterans superseded my concern or love for them. That's what they felt. It's like, you don't give a shit about us, so you care about us, your fellow veterans. It's, um, somewhere along the line, I reconnected with that essence of the military that's family. Um, and trying to find ways to make space for that and my family were tough. Even my wife she wasn't interested in it. She goes, where'd all this come from? It's like, well, it just started, I just reconnected with it. Well, you haven't been this way since I know you. Well, shit happens. Things in our lives change, things trigger old thoughts and memories to come forward. So I joined the VFW in 2006. 2 years later, I was a post commander. And once that happened, it was just, I got involved in the legislative stuff. I ran the Memorial Day Parade for as long as I was commander. I don't think anybody's ever going to let me not do the parade. The Memorial Day Parade in Torrington. They'll never let me out of it. I mean, I have it down to a science now. It's like, I don't even think about it. I think it's less so. It might, when I was going through my shit, my son was going through his own shit. And so we drank together a lot of times. And he saw me do some just ugly stuff. Yeah, I was not a good role model. He looked up to me up to that point. He thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. He idolized me. And I was my own iconoclast. I destroyed who he thought I was. My daughter, I don't know. My daughter's a tough read because with her everything is drama, so it's really hard to take. And get a good read on. My son and I were best friends for the longest time. I taught him how to skate in skate parks. I remember teaching him how to drop in. He was good. He was a natural. He was a good skater. Yeah, low to the ground. Yeah, I miss that. I miss having the connection. I think my wife has suffered the most. When after my memory came back, I went through a lot of women. I had sex with a lot of women. But a lot of them were black. And at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. It was like sex. But when most of them wound up being black women, I started to wonder about the connection between them and my assailant, and why women, not men. Yeah, it's tough to figure out.
Has that trauma impacted your ability to have intimate relationships with other people?
On an emotional level. I recently finished a study at the VA that uses ketamine to treat PTSD. And for the first time since my memory came back, I haven't dissociated. I've actually experienced some good emotions. But in terms of feeling anything deeply, like love, that's still not great. I think things with my wife are cordial. I haven't had sex with her in forever. I haven't had sex in forever, which is, ugh. Especially as much as I like it. I haven't had anything, so.
And forgive me if this is too personal of a question. Uh, ha, have you had other relationships with men?
Um, Not relationships.
Sexual relations?
Yeah.
Consensually?
Yeah, years ago. Yeah, I was still trying to. I think I was still trying to figure things out. Um, I had a boss who. I had a boss who went after me, a guy. And that was another case. I was in a vulnerable position and wound up letting him have sex with me.
This was after your military service?
I want to say 1987. It was like 1987, maybe 1988. But not since. By the same token, here I am trying to reframe how I see things. It's like, if it was group sex, I could see me being participant with a man, as long as there's a woman there. But I don't know about one-on-one. I've gotten very comfortable with the notion that I'm more turned on by someone's intellect and wit than anything else. Looks they have less importance to me. So I can't say no, I wouldn't. I don't think I'd have a singular relationship with a man. I don't think I'd have long term. I think when you love someone for who they are, you figure out all the other stuff. Even if, tab A doesn't fit in a slot B. If it's unconventional, you find a way to make it work. It's not everything, but it's, in very Heinleinian nature. It's the most profound way two friends can share each other. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just not me. So I've stopped struggling about worrying whether or not I'm gay or bi or, on the whole, I'm all about women. But I can't say, I'm not an absolute thinker, so allowing room for something. I mean, what happens if someday I come across this guy who just rocks my world intellectually?
Sorry, I'm trying to get the light to come back on again. The light is coming in.
Oh, I see.
From the blind, and it's being weird. Okay, yeah, I was curious about that. Have there been any kind of relationships with men during the era of don't ask, don't tell, while you were in the military or before?
Oh, no. No. No, I take that back. I had something with one civilian, and it was once. And it was more because we wound up crashing over this friend's house. We had all gone out to see Rocky Horror. And this kid, Danny, was gay. And he woke me up. We were having sex. So but I participated. But I was also good with not doing that again. It was, like I said, I've done it, but it's not really my thing.
Still figuring it out.
Especially at that age. Yeah, I kind of hate the way society forces people into buckets, into lanes. That's a coming of age is experimenting and figuring out who you are, and I think that a lot of us have been denied that. Or if we have delved, that we're taught that it's shameful. I don't think it is. As long as no one's getting hurt, that's experiment away. But then again, I tend to think about things a little more openly. Like I said, my thing is intellect. I think that people like that are going to be rarer and rarer as time goes on.
So I have a couple of concluding questions, but before I ask those, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about anything we haven't talked about yet. Is there anything throughout the interview that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked or hasn't come up?
Well, let's see. We talked about my childhood. I'll tell you, in the aftermath of my memory coming back, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I wasn't really to begin with, but now I'm really not worried about it. If it happens, it happens. But I don't go seeking it out either. I'm less likely to take shit from people now. I will find a constructive way to address it, but I think I've got a better toolbox for dealing with it.
So you don't think that that's symptomatic of PTSD, but rather some new...
Well, I think part of it's growth and part of it is PTSD kind of turned my filter off in a lot of ways. But I've also discovered that, you need water. It's thirsty.
Yeah.
Such a good dog. Here. Is it good? I usually have a bowl with him, with myself. Then I didn't bring it.
I don't have anything. Sorry.
It's okay.
So how has having a service dog benefited you as you've continued to cope with trauma?
Well, any place that is not home, he's been helpful when I dissociate. He gives me something to take care of. I connect with him and he connects with me. Being a deaf dog, he communicates more with his eyes. So I know when I'm getting a look. He helps me stay calm. If I was starting to have a panic attack, he's right there. But I haven't had one in a long time, so. We're not going to play. Um, I can give this dog love. I just give him affection, and there's no conditions with it. It's not a person. People have conditions for everything. I, it's not misinterpreted. I mean, it's just received. He does the same thing. He's not a licker, but well, me anyway. Apparently, I'm sour or something. But he does this. This is where he'll just lean up against me. It's kind of cool. Now, did I finish my thought earlier?
We were talking about your philosophy on life, that you're not afraid of death, and how that might be connected to symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah, developing PTSD, I think, just took off a lot of filters. Because all of a sudden, the things that, like you said, sitting in a bar, hear people complaining about trivial things, that all of a sudden was not a part of my life. I just had this different scope on life that was like, you realize this isn't worth bitching about. Right. You know, I still go through that at school. I went through some of that at school. It's like, wow, you guys need to grow up. But it's not that. It's just they don't have the experience.
Right.
And it's hard to frame 55 years of life for someone who's 27. But by the same token, I've received from classmates their appreciation for my openness, my unselfish nature in sharing myself, my experiences, which helped them clarify their views of like dealing with PTSD. I am at my best when I'm serving others. So that's one of the reasons that I started opening my mouth. My memory came back in a public place. I figured, well, it's out there. Let's just keep it out there, and we'll ride that wave. And while it's been a struggle to deal with, there are days when I say, oh, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. And it's like, you know what? I'm not going anywhere. I just stay home, which is really unusual for me.
What's next for you?
I want to finish school. I really want to get back into Smith. And I love Smith. I love the school.
And you're in the Master's of Social Work degree, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to continue to use that education to benefit veterans? Yep.
I think that in a lot of ways I'm uniquely poised to better serve veterans than a lot of others. I mean, we have one class at school on military, whatever. It's called Being on the Battlefield. And the course, for what they cover in the course, is half of what it could be. And when I know more than the professor does about things she's teaching, from personal experience, or how is that person qualified to teach that class? Because there's no one to really question her. And of course, I got into trouble for questioning her.
So, do you think education might be another continuing theme in your life?
Yeah, I like teaching. I had a dalliance with teaching, high school. I did some substituting in middle school too, but I did some real teaching in high school. With math, and I loved it. I loved the students, hated the administrators.
Sounds like you're a good teacher then.
I have no tolerance for bullshit. I had a real simple methodology, especially as a substitute. Find the class clown, piss on him, make him yours. He'll be your best friend and everybody will follow. And it works. When your wit is faster than the class clowns, I wasn't afraid to take them off at the knees either. You know, I figured if I'm teaching in high school, what's going to happen? If I get an intellectual challenge, they're outgunned. And if I get a physical challenge, they're outgunned. So what's left? Um, they were, you know, for the most part, they were just awesome kids. I mean, there were kids that definitely had problems. Like when I substituted math classes, we had Hispanic students, Dominican mostly, whose English wasn't so good. So if I would teach, reteach, give an assignment, and then spend time reteaching again to the 2 or 3 Spanish kids in the class, and I would speak what Spanish I could. I said "más despacio, por favor" several times to get them to slow down because they'd start getting excited and they speak really fast in Spanish. It's like, I can't hear that. So we found a good middle ground, and I was able to help them do that. Well, I had one teacher go, "You don't do that." It's like, my job is to get this information into their heads. I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that. So I think a little humility, this is where I said, I think a little humility goes a long way.
I agree. Um, I've asked this particular question in the 5 years I've been interviewing veterans, so I'll take it as maybe a place where you can reflect about your experience with humanity. What are the greatest and the worst aspects of humanity that you've personally experienced or witnessed?
Well, I like the greatest aspect of humanity is when they come together after a disaster to help each other. I think that's people at their best. The thing that concerns me the most is the lack of critical thinkers that are being developed in our schools. It scares the hell out of me. And for better or for worse, I think it's a political thing. Because when people aren't critical thinkers, it's easier to lead them. And we should be developing critical thinkers, not robots.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And I came face to face with that at my school system with my kids. When we raised our kids, look, it's okay to disagree with us as long as you do so respectfully. And we got called in to school a couple of times for my son throughout his career in school. And he challenged their knowledge base. And first question out of my mouth was, he ever disrespectful to you? Oh no, he's easily the most polite kid in the class. So what's the problem? Well, he questioned me. Well, I said, that's kind of how learning happens, though. You know, something isn't resonating with them and they're trying to work through that. As a teacher, you help them get to where you are if you are the person in authority. If you don't know, you say, let's take a look at this together and maybe we'll both learn something. That's the mark of a teacher. And of course, they didn't want to ever hear that from me because, you know, I'm just a parent. I never said, oh, my boy is not, he's a little angel. I know he's not an angel. But if he's trying to learn something and you don't want to deal with it, well, that's on you. And if students not questioning you, that's your issue. Don't put it on my son. So I want people to be the ones who question. You know, there's more to the Socratic method than just the Socratic method. You know, he taught in a colloquium. So the idea would be postulated and everyone would discuss it. And from that, a genesis would take place where they would come out with something greater than the sum of its parts. What's wrong with that? Everybody wins.
Right.
Everybody wins. And with my kids, you know, if they challenged us, one of two things happens. I either fortify my position or I change my mind. Again, who loses? Who wins? Everybody wins.
I agree.
So it's too much ego. There's too much ego in teaching. And it's unfortunate. Just like I ran into with this professor at Smith with the military stuff. She was a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. And her job is basically to patch people up mentally and put them back out there. Not to cleave if they needed to be cut away from, you know, the troops. Yeah, was probably the only bad review of a class I ever gave. It was skating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I just have one more question, man. When history is written, what do you want to say about you?
He did his best to make the world the place he thought it should be.
Fair enough. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time and teaching me about your world and sharing your history with me.
It was a pleasure. It's